single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantal Dastra. Starting this month, New Yorkers making under a certain amount will receive a one-time inflation refund check. The checks will be mailed to over 8 million households across the state through November. The amount received will be $200 or $400, depending on the household salary, and is based on the 2023 tax filing. According to Governor Kathy Hochul, the move to send the checks, which was passed in the most recent state budget, is part of a larger effort to help mitigate the effects of the rising cost of inflation. To learn more about the impact of the refund checks, we spoke with State Budget Director Blake Washington. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Director Washington.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can you help us understand the impact of the inflation refund checks that New Yorkers are set to start receiving as early as this month?
Sure. So the inflation rebate check that we have was enacted in the current year budget. It was one of many items that the governor has put forward to promote affordability in the state of New York. The affordability rebate check, inflation rebate check, forgive me, will be in an amount of up to $400, depending on taxpayer filing status, and it's coming soon to a mailbox near you. This intervention is one that that Governor Hochul's put forward in recognition of that people in the state of New York need a little bit of relief. Everywhere that she travels, people are relating to her about the high costs of groceries or gasoline or utilities, whatever the case may be. There's an urgency of now to get money into people's pockets, and that's exactly what the governor is doing with this initiative. We have a rebate check. We also have a child tax credit that's going to triple in the current year. We have an expansion of the middle class tax cut, which we're also looking forward to, and then finally we have universal free school meals in public schools throughout the state of New York, which is kicked in at the beginning of the school year. Those things combined provide for $5,000 back in New Yorkers' pockets at a time when they need it most.
And can you give us some insight into what it took for both the executive chamber and the legislature to work together to get these different policy items in the final enacted budget earlier this year?
Well, I think the insight to begin, the colonel was working with the governor, and she tasked the entire executive branch. Let's come up with ideas that are creative to get money back in people's pockets. I want near-term interventions, and I want ones that'll be sort of rolled out over time and sustainable fiscally over the long term. So it was her charge back in November of last year when we first got into this in crafting the executive budget. This is where the marker that she laid down was affordability, 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 and we carried that forward. To their credit, we worked with the legislature, and they saw too the wisdom of all these policy changes, and they adapted them. There were some small tweaks to the programs, but generally speaking, they saw the value and they acted accordingly. To their credit, and now New Yorkers have much to be proud of.
And how much is it costing the state to send these rebate checks to New Yorkers, and what is funding this policy?
Well, the rebate checks themselves will cost roughly $2 billion on a one-time basis, and beyond that, it costs the state postage to send to New Yorkers. It'll be a one-time check. This is one that obviously $2 billion each and every year for this purpose would be unsustainable, but it's one where looking at what the state has collected during an era of heightened inflation, this was one way of taking those resources and pledging them back to New Yorkers on a one-time basis. So the cost is $2 billion, and it's a worthy investment.
And when it comes to getting the word out there to New Yorkers and, making sure that they understand that these checks will be coming to their mailboxes, how is the state going to be approaching that and ensuring that everyone is in the know?
Well, we have the state's #1 salesperson, that being Governor Hochul herself. She's been in every corner of the state announcing this initiative. It's on the tax department's website. There's been social media engagement. There's engagement such as this as well, which will also help New Yorkers think to be reminded about this. It'll take about 8 weeks to get start to finish to get the checks out to New Yorkers. But when that's all said and done, real results to real people.
And if a New Yorker doesn't receive a check in the mail, should they reach out to your office or what other state agency to get information about the checks?
Well, first and foremost, give it a couple of weeks. Your neighbor may get a check before you. It's just dependent upon your filing date. You know, perhaps if you filed it sooner than your neighbor, you'd get it sooner, or vice versa. So I think that if you filed your if you filed taxes on the time in 2023, there's no additional work for you to do. The State Department of Taxation and Finance will send you a check. So there should be pretty seamless. If that does not come, I think there's an 800 number on the tax department's website. But let's give it some time before calling, because I think we put the whole state government behind this, and we're going to deliver the result.
Are there any specific areas or industries that you're hoping New Yorkers will use the money from the checks to invest in to best support the state's economy?
Not necessarily. I think that when the governor has been doing her public engagements, she sees it just as she's the first mom governor, and she sees it just as a fundamental ability to give people a little bit of wiggle room in whether it be this week's checks, this month's checks. Maybe it takes a little bit off of a utility check. Maybe it helps to give mom and dad a night out, or to buy some new school supplies. Whatever the case may be, we're happy to provide the benefit. It'll give some New Yorkers just a little bit of breathing room, and that's the intent. So there's no express or preferred way in which people spend the dollars.
How do you see the governor and the legislature building on these efforts in the years to come, for example, in next year's budget?
Well, I mean, we have to first and foremost work within a fiscal framework that makes sense, and obviously we have some stress coming into next year's budget. We have current year investments that we want to continue to promote. We have out year deficits that we have to address. But as the governor tells any New Yorker wherever she is, we're not done yet. Maybe we can't do another $2 billion one-time rebate check, but what can we do to make New Yorkers' lives a little bit easier? The child tax credit will phase in over time. In the first year, we'll triple the amount for children under the age of 4. Then the following year, we're going to increase the amount for children over the age of 4. We have a middle class tax cut that'll phase in over 2 years. And we're looking at any number of items from our state agencies. We've solicited the same to get at the heart of the affordability crisis that we face today. And all options are on the table, and I think that as long as they're fiscally sustainable and they're things that we can actually deliver, we're certainly all ears.
And what has been the response from New Yorkers when it comes to these different policy initiatives that you're going to, that you've already started rolling out, but also continuing to roll out?
The response has been favorable, because I think that New Yorkers see that that New York State government is paying attention to them, and I think when they see it, the whole of this proposal, when they see, of these actions, when they see it's $5,000, up to $5,000 in New Yorkers' pockets, they see that New York government is trying, and they see that New York government is responsive and paying attention to them, and that's the goal. And to make it a little easier, and we want to make sure that we keep that momentum. Let's get rid of the red tape. Let's get rid of the problems that New Yorkers face in interacting state government as well. Let's work with that on any front to reduce the burdens that New Yorkers have to pay for any number of things in their life. However we can help on this, we can't do it all, but however we can help, we're happy to do it.
And when it comes to funding from Washington and threats to funding, how does your office see that playing out heading into next year? And what will your communication be like with federal officials to ensure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to funding for the state?
Well, the state of New York relies upon the federal government for a substantial amount of resources, $93 billion in a given year. And it's for any number of services. Chief among them is Medicaid, of course. I think in general, there's a policy shift in Washington that'll endure. There is going to be a changing relationship among the federal government and the states, the relationship of what the federal government will fund and the states everywhere will have to adapt. It doesn't matter the political persuasion, the dynamic is changing, and we in the state of New York have to sort of adapt to that. But there are some things that come from the federal government that are just sort of indefensible. And I, you know, the governor last week shouted from the rooftops about a cut that came to the state, was proposed for the state of New York for Homeland Security funding. $187 million was lost. But the governor also kept her cool, and she collaborated. She made contact with the White House. She made the public case about why this was important. The state of New York being the epicenter of the 9/11 attacks, being the target of international terrorism previously, and these funds were ones that were non-negotiable. We needed them back, and we're really delighted to have that collaboration. The governor working with the president to receive those funds back to the state of New York. The governor will fight where she needs to, particularly when it relates to protecting New Yorkers. And then I think that we're going to have to revisit all the other actions that come through H.R. 1. There's a whole bunch of funding retrenchment that's coming our way, which we're going to be dealing with in the governor's budget and then budgets to come. And there's a lot of rulemaking that's going to come our way. We have a lot of work to do. The upside is we have a really talented group of people in the Division of Budget, and that'll help us to drag it across the finish line. They're going to give good policy recommendations to the governor, and we'll take it from there.
You know, you'll be going into your third budget season next year, so any big takeaways from years prior that you're hoping to implement into next year's budget?
Well, I think that the takeaways generally are to continue to collaborate, even when it seems like, even when you have, when it seems that sometimes things are stalled out or getting a little uneasy. The governor's instruction to us are let's just keep the dialogue going. Let's keep the dialogue going with the advocacy world. Let's keep talking to the legislature. Let's try to get to a deal where everybody walks away happy or happy-ish, as the case may be. But let's not have our posture be one where we're closed off to the world. Let's figure out. Let's be solutions-oriented. If we can keep that general cadence as we go forward, we'll all win. So I think going into next year, knowing that there's any number of challenges coming our way, let's keep our heads on straight. Let's talk about the facts before us, and let's collaborate and deliver a budget for all New Yorkers.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today, but we thank you so very much for sitting down with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And we were speaking with Blake Washington, Director for the New York State Division of the Budget. October is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is a time of dedicated awareness for the issue and to provide support to victims. In this next segment, we sat down with Kelli Owens, who serves as the Executive Director for the New York State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, to unpack the issue and to understand the work that New York is doing. Here's that important conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Kelli.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So October, as you know, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Can you tell me, what this month means to you and what the public should take away from this time of dedicated awareness?
Yeah, so for us at OPDV, Domestic Violence Awareness Month is every month. But this month is really dedicated for people to understand and bring awareness to the issue of domestic violence every year. We acknowledge it every year. And this year, we're really focused on the voices of survivors and what that looks like. So we're really lifting up those voices this year.
And I know the Clothesline Project, I believe, is returning. That's one of the methods of awareness that the state does. Can you tell me, for people who might not know, what is the Clothesline Project and how long has the state been doing it?
Yeah, the Clothesline Project is a visual representation. It's been around about 30 years. And it's a visual representation of how people bring their abuse out in a way, and it's really, they take the opportunity to make a t-shirt and really promote and help people understand what their feeling was and what their feeling is now around the abuse they may have suffered. It's really a very moving representation of what abuse looks like. We do it in the concourse. I think we're on our 3rd year of doing it in the concourse. And it is a moving representation. Sometimes it's troubling for people. The first year we were there, people were shocked by what they saw on some of those T-shirts. I have a real passion for making sure that we don't edit survivors' voices. So we want to make sure that what is really on that shirt is what people want to say.
And can you talk about how this project and projects like it have raised awareness for the issue, how you've seen that be impactful?
Yeah, so I've been in this business about 30 years. I started at a local. And I will say that I thought that we were moving along in how people viewed domestic violence as a societal issue that we all had to deal with. And we were moving along really well until a couple of weeks ago. And this is meant to be political. It is just when the president was talking about domestic violence, and he talked about it in a way that we talked about it 30 years ago, about it's just a fight between a man and a woman in their house, and then it becomes a crime. It is a crime. So I'm troubled a little bit with that narrative being out there again. So it's our job to make sure that we keep beating back that narrative, to make sure that everybody understands domestic violence doesn't only affect those in the home. It is a crime, but it's also something that we all need to address. And there are different ways to address that. Not everybody thinks it needs to be a criminal justice response to it. Survivors may not need that, but it's got to be taken seriously. And I don't want to see it slide back, and I feel like there's a bit of a slide.
Are you worried, going off of what you were saying, about that narrative impacting New York and the conversations around domestic violence?
Yeah, so I'm really proud of New York. New York has an Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence. We've had it for over 30 years, so that really speaks to New York's values. Under this governor, there's been investment in domestic violence. There's been investment in my agency and what we do and the seriousness of the work that we do and how we interact with our sister state agencies and the community and the legislature and her. So I'm hopeful that New York's legacy around domestic violence remains. I am concerned for the message that it does send across the country, and the willingness for people to just accept domestic violence again, where we've come so far. I don't want us to backslide.
And can you talk about what the state is of domestic violence in the state here? I know from your data, from your agency, there's been some data about hotline calls and sort of an increase in severity of domestic violence. Can you talk about what that looks like?
So I've been now with the agency 6 years. And when I first came, we went right into COVID. And when we went into COVID, there was an immediate decrease in calls into both the domestic violence hotlines as well as police. Drastic. In the first month or so. And then we saw it go straight up into our hotlines. So people were looking for a non-criminal justice response, and there was a spike. It went up considerably. We have now, in regards to hotline calls, settled in about a 30% increase of where we were prior to COVID. But we also are seeing different dynamics playing out in domestic violence. I think it speaks a lot to the mental health crisis that's going on in this country, and the severity of which things escalate so quickly, where we may have been talking somebody through safety planning for a long-term plan to get out. The severity has increased, so we're doing a bit more emergency planning and getting people out to safety a lot quicker. So I think that there's a lot going on in regards to the dynamics playing out a little different. Technology-facilitated abuse is rampant. About 97% of DV cases involve some form of technology-facilitated abuse now.
Do you think the technology-facilitated abuse is one of the things that's contributing to the increased or rising danger levels in domestic violence? And what do you think those contributing factors are? Why are we seeing an increase? And what can the state do to address these things?
I'm not sure if I can scientifically say why I think things are getting more severe. I think our reactions are a bit more severe these days. in regards to lots of things. I think we're all kind of escalated these days in the world that we're living in, and that contributes to the stress factors in a home. Over the past couple of years, the governor's been really focused on public safety and the public safety response and really investing in that. We have now a STRIVE program in pilot counties across the state that have a high incidence of domestic violence, where we're asking communities to come together. So not just law enforcement, but law enforcement, the provider community, the schools, the courts, and come together and really assess high-risk cases in a way that we haven't been doing before, because there is an evidence-based program that can help us predict lethality in domestic violence. So that program's been up now about a year in pilot counties across the state to really figure out if we do coordinated community response, which is a thing, and high-risk assessment, can we reduce domestic violence, homicide, and severity?
Do you have high hopes for the high-risk assessment piece of legislation? Will that potentially impact DV cases?
Yeah, I think, we've been looking at how we can do lethality not only in the public safety sector, but how can we do lethality in a healthcare setting when somebody shows up to an emergency room who may not be using that criminal justice response, but they may be using another system. So we're looking at how can we take those lethality indicators and really have other practices use those to feed information into a high-risk team, so we can really bring the resources to that individual to make sure that we can keep them safe.
And what kind of trends are you seeing in terms of the number of victims of domestic violence? I know there was a 2023 report from the comptroller talking about an increase from 2019 to 2022 in domestic violence victims. What trends are we seeing today?
Yeah, I always get a little resonant when we start to talk about trends, because we know that domestic and sexual violence is one of the most underreported things, whether it's, and what are you looking at too is important, right? Are we looking at data that's just law enforcement data? Are we looking at shelter data? Are we looking at healthcare data? So I get a little resonant when we start to talk about what trends look like. We do have a dashboard, we track those things. And I think that people are aware of domestic violence and report it more than they did 10 and 15 years ago. And I think people are more aware of different dynamics. When we used to think, okay, domestic violence is physical violence, I think people now are realizing that if somebody's controlling your money, that's also violence. If somebody's stalking you on your cell phone, that's also violence that needs to be reported. So I think those are the things that are playing out that might be leading to the numbers, which is a good thing, right? I also, one of the things I got asked all during COVID is, the numbers are increasing. Well, that's a good thing, right? Because that means that somebody's reaching out for help. So I always get a little, when we start talking about numbers, we're always just taking a little bit of the number.
Do you think the lethality assessment, kind of going back to that, could potentially impact, increasing, making people feel more comfortable to report things if they're happening?
So lethality is kind of a down the road kind of tool. What I do think is if we are doing better talking about lethality and fatality and severe cases of domestic violence, we have an opportunity to educate people for where does it start and what does it start to look like, so people can identify quicker before they get to that, am I in a lethal situation? So that's what we're hoping, that we can train those helper and public servant areas where somebody goes for help to understand how to identify it quicker, and what are the interventions that need to happen quicker before it reaches that level of lethality.
And I want to go back to the technology-based gender violence that you touched on a little bit. Can you explain for people who don't know, what is gender-based technology violence, and what does that look like currently in the state? Yeah.
So. Technology-facilitated abuse is something that the governor asked us as OPDV to really take on a couple years ago and try to figure out, because it is a new dynamic. It is just like you know, when an abuser can find a new way to control somebody, they're going to use it. And technology has become a wonderful way in which you control somebody's behavior and you make sure that you know where they are. So it could be anything from somebody wanting your passwords or looking at your phone or demanding to see your phone and demanding all those things, all the way to somebody taking over your identity online and using deep fakes and all of those things to make sure you're in control or that they're harming you. So there is a wide range. It is a new dynamic of which we all have a lot to learn across disciplines because we're seeing technology-facilitated abuse play out at a very, very, very young age. And we're all not as equipped as we should be to handle it. So that's our job, is to try to figure out what are the tools that parents need, what are the tools that educators need, what are the tools that law enforcement needs to make sure that we're addressing it in the right way and making sure that survivors are supported.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about this important topic.
And thank you to you for your commitment to this issue.
And we were speaking with Kelli Owens, the Executive Director for the State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence.
Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WMET,